So I've got a hybrid battery pack here. I bought an extra module from this battery pack so I don't have to take the whole pack apart and waste a bunch of film time to show you the two ways to use this. So in order to do it the way it was designed to be used, I would have to remove a module. I'd have to, this one's nice because it's a little bit of work, obviously taking the battery apart and then removing the module. And then this one's nice because it has some screws that can separate the actual enclosure. Now, a lot of the battery pack manufacturers don't make them this way. I'd say probably it's a 50-50 split between the ones that you can actually take apart without destroying the actual casing, as opposed to the ones that you can't. And then you'd have to cut it apart. But again, if you cut it apart, then you have no choice but to replace the whole module because there's no way of saving it after you cut it. But this one is nice because it actually has a couple screws that allows me to separate the top from the bottom to then go ahead and get out all the individual cells. So this is the string module that we kept referring to. We said that we have a series of thermistor wires. So here's the thermistor wires. This is our safety device. So if I don't want to stand here and babysit this as it's doing its procedure, I need to go ahead and at least hook this up. That way if this ever starts to get too hot, the machine will automatically shut it off, shut the process off, so I don't damage the battery pack in any way. So if I had the battery out and I was doing it the way it was initially intended to be done, then I could take this series of wires here and I can just strategically place them in different areas just so I have some type of temperature type of input here. Now I don't need to hook all of these up because there's not that many modules here, or I should say cells here. So I'm going to hook up 3, which is going to be one in between each one of these. There's a total of 8 cells inside this particular module. So each one of these, this is a film style, the technical words are a film style module, which means that each one of these has 2. So there's a total of 4 different versions here, but each one of these little packs has 2 cells in it. I said that the other wires, the string modules, I have a total of 24 red wires, but that's if I needed 24. I don't need 24 for this particular battery pack because I've only got 8 cells. So I only need 8, so I only need the first set of wires to hook up. This one has 12 wires, 12 positive wires in it. So at that point, the black wire, there's only going to be one black small alligator clip wire. That goes to the module's most negative terminal, which is also the output terminal, the negative output terminal. So I got that black small alligator clip hooked to the most negative side. Then I go ahead and I take, each one of these are labeled with a little decal on it, and it says battery, this one says battery 24 plus. I know you're not going to see that on the camera, but I obviously go in numerical order. So battery cell number 1 went to this one. Then battery cell number 2 goes to the other side over here. Battery cell number 3 went to this side, battery cell number 4, and it just keeps going back and forth until I get up to battery cell number 8, which happens to be this one. Now I also have 2 big heavy leads coming from the CDT. So these little leads are telling me what each individual cell voltage is. These 2 big red and black leads here, they go to the output terminals, and I went ahead, and this is going to tell me what the whole module voltage is. So this is, if each one of these has got, 3 volts, we'll just keep the math simple. It's not this high a voltage, but if each one of those had 5 volts, then that means this whole module, since there's 8 cells, that means this whole module would have 40. It's going to be like 36 point something volts. So once I went ahead and I hooked that all up, doing it the way the tool was intended to be used, I'm going to go ahead and flip up this AC switch here. It's going to take a little bit of time. You're going to hear some fans kick on. That's how we actually cool the electronics inside the machine. And then once this screen comes up, I'm also going to flip up the DC voltage after I went ahead and hooked up all these wires. So I'm going to flip on the AC switch. Again, I've got the 110 power cord plugged into it. The big difference between the 110 and 220 power cord is it cuts the specifications in half. So the Autel opening screen comes on. You might even be able to hear the fans right now. Those fans are at low speed right now. Once we tell it to start working, you're going to hear the fans start spinning a little bit faster. So we'll let the opening screen disappear here, and it comes up and I got 4 buttons to choose from. So I got a settings button. Just like all of our other tools, you usually don't have to go into settings more than the first time. So the settings button is going to be how you're going to hook the tool up to your wireless internet. It's going to be the language that you want the tool to be displayed in. It's going to be just, you know, housekeeping type of stuff. The only other time you have to go to that on a routine basis is that's where the updates for the tool are going to reside as well. So every once in a while you hit the settings button just to see if there's an available update. If there is, you just push a button just like you would on our scan tool, and then it just does its thing. I also have a data button. Now the data button is going to be where every single time I use this machine on a battery of any sort, it's going to store a record inside here. That's where all of those records are going to reside, is inside the internal memory. I've got a USB slot that we talked about right on the front. I don't have it installed right now, but if I wanted to get those records off this machine and put them on a hard copy of a USB, I could literally put any USB drive in there. The tool does come with one USB drive. That I don't recommend ever losing that drive because that has the owner's manual on it. So any of the other USB drives you put in there is probably not going to have the owner's manual on unless you copied it over to that. So I have 2 main buttons, and this is where most mechanics are going to be spending the majority of their time. What am I trying to do? Am I trying to discharge or am I trying to charge? So if I was trying to balance this, I would have to start with the discharge. If I was going to transport this whole battery pack, I'd have to start with the discharge. If I was trying to, once it was discharged and I wanted to charge it back up, then obviously I'd hit the charge. Both of those are going to work the exact same way. One is obviously just going to be taking voltage out, one's going to be putting voltage in. So I'll hit the discharge like you normally do. This is the screen, the menu screen, that adds the confusion. But again, I'm sharing the presentation into the Teams chat. You get this information that you're looking for here off the battery identification number, which we saw in the presentation earlier. So I would know how to populate these screens. I've already have it populated for this particular module assembly that we're going to be using. So once I actually made any changes on here, I'd have to hit the save button because that meant I made changes. And you hear a little beeping. And then it's going to come up with the screen that tells me everything I want to know about this particular battery module assembly. Now the DC switch is still turned off, so I always leave it turned off until I get to this screen because this tells me, there's my 8 different cells here, this confirms to me that I have the red wires hooked up correctly. So once I see that all of those numbers down here are populated, then I will go ahead and flip this up, and now I will see that the menu buttons up on the top are also going to start reading correctly. So right now I've got cell voltages between 3.826 volts. I got a 3.829. I got the highest one is 3.831. The lowest one is 3.817. So it's a little bit out of balance, but not drastically out of balance. Once I go ahead and flip this up, right now it says my module's got 0 volts because I don't have this turned on. I'm going to turn this on, and that immediately comes up and tells me what the overall module voltage is. So all of those little 3-point whatever values get added together, and it tells me right now that that module has 30.60 volts in it, right? So if we wanted to take a calculator and add all those together, it should add up to the number we just said. So at this point, before I tell it to do anything else, there's different ways that I can look at the diagnostic section of the screen. So right now I'm looking at cell info. I can look at cell voltage, and this is how I would get the actual bar graphs. And again, it's telling me that overall, because of the information that I gave it on the setup screen based off this battery identification number, overall the battery, that module, is not in the green because it's a little bit low on charge, plus it's out of balance. Primarily, cell numbers 3 and 4, 4 being the weakest one, that's the one that's most out of balance, and then cell number 3 is the one that has the most amount of voltage in it. When it's all done, we want to see all of those in the green, right? That's the ultimate goal that we're trying to get. I also can actually look at the module voltage section here. Now the module voltage section is going to be a timed bar graph. So we're probably not going to see this start to populate across the screen unless we were to make this video a fairly long length video. But at this point, I would hit the start button, and since we're in discharge, the actual voltages are going to start to want to discharge. Now, before I go through that, because the discharge and charge works the exact same way, before I go through that and actually tell it to start discharging or charging, I'm going to go ahead and shut this off, and I'm going to show you the way that most mechanics will probably going to be using this tool. So they're probably not going to take the time, or maybe they can't without damaging the modules, of hooking up all these little red wires. Now this particular hybrid battery pack that we have here falls within the range of being able to do the entire pack at once. So I don't have to worry about going ahead and separating the battery pack in any manner. So I'm just going to go ahead and carefully remove these. These film style cells are a little bit dangerous because they're not very secure, and we don't want to short any of them together and cause sparks. I'm going to go ahead and remove these extra wires here. And I'm just going to get this whole assembly out of the way so that the camera can pick up how most mechanics are going to use this. So just put this on the ground. Now, again, no matter what, make sure you stress the importance of at least having these thermistor wires. So these thermistor wires, in this particular case, this isn't the way it comes right out of a car, because I've got plexiglass on here for training classes and stuff. Normally this would be a steel shield, but I would be actually taping these wires to the steel part of the enclosure if this was still inside the car. But since it's not inside the car, I'm just going to go ahead and feed these wires through. And this is the safety device that we were talking about. Now, I don't need to hook up these other wires if I'm just trying to charge or discharge this entire pack. And again, remember, the active balancing consists of discharging and then charging them back up, hopefully at an equal rate. So at this point, the next step we're going to have to do is, notice I'm not wearing any gloves right now. I don't need to because I got the high voltage disconnect unplugged. Eventually I'm going to have to plug this back in though. So at this point what I need to do is I need to hook up the positive and negative big fat cables to the switching contactors. So it's going to be where the actual battery the battery high voltage and positive and negative cables would go inside into the actual battery pack itself. So I need to be on the other side of the contactors though, because I have no way to close the actual contactors over here. So in this case, to get onto the other side of the contactors are going to be right in this area of the junction box over here. Now I can also go ahead and bypass that 100%, and I can actually hook them up to where it goes to the actual box over here, the actual contactor boxes. So because it's going to be easier to see on camera, I'm going to choose to do it here as opposed to going over where they would do it when it's on a car. So this way you can kind of see it. So what I'm doing here is don't let them use the small wires. I'm doing this just so for sake of the camera purpose here, because the small wires aren't going to carry the amperage, right? So if I was trying to discharge this battery for any length of time, these small wires would get pretty hot and want to burn open. So you'd want to make sure that they have the actual battery cables from the CDT going to these connectors as opposed to what I'm doing here. So one of these is going to be a positive cable, one's going to be a negative cable. It's really nice because it's also labeled on here. So this is the positive cable over here. So I'm going to go to this one. And this one here is the negative cable. So I'm going to go to this guy. And again, I'm still safe not to have any of my gloves hooked up because, or turned on because I don't have this plugged into anything. Now the high voltage disconnect, it goes in this area over here. So once I go ahead and put this in and actually energize it, then you will not see me touching any of these wires without having gloves on. There's no reason for me to touch any of those wires, so my gloves are off camera over there. It's safe for me to just take my bare hands to plug this part in though. So I'm gonna look to see which direction this goes. Looks like it goes in this general direction over here. And this is always the hard part, is this particular battery pack I got from a salvage yard, and it's a little bit difficult to get the switch, the locking mechanism, to work correctly on it. Okay, so I've got that now locked in place. Again, at this point, I wouldn't want to touch any of that stuff with my bare hands. I'm going to turn the machine back on. And again, the only reason I turn it off is because of those fans. They might be interfering with the microphone. So we'll let it turn back on here. It's going to take a little bit of time for the Autel logo to come back up. I don't have to change any of the settings that we had in there before because we already had that kind of set up for this type of battery pack here. And then once that logo goes away, I'm going to hit the DC switch and turn this back on after I go and select save on the actual screen here. So I actually accidentally pushed that button twice. So let me go ahead and hit save. The difference is, since none of those red wires are hooked up here, the diagnostic section of the tool does not work at the bottom. So all of these little cell voltages are now reading 0 volts. And to make it a little easier to see on camera, if I went to the bar graphs of them, so if I try to hit that button, you don't see any bar graphs because those wires aren't hooked up to anything, so they can't possibly be reading anything. So now I'm going to go ahead and flip this button in the up position here. We'll give it a couple seconds to read the overall pack voltage. It tells me that this particular whole battery pack right now has 234.82 volts. At this point, if I went ahead and said, hit the start button, I do have a little error message down here telling me that, hey, I have no voltage being read on these red wires, which we would expect, right? If I hit the start button, it's going to turn on and it's going to start to discharge this battery. Same thing would happen in reverse if I was in the charging mode. If I hit charge and I got to this section, it would start to charge the battery pack back up. Now remember from the presentation, if this battery was too large, right? So if this was, say, a 300 volt battery, that would exceed the range of this tool, even with the 220 volt cable in it. So what I meant by going ahead and opening up the pack and separating the actual connections is, in this particular case, this has a high voltage disconnect. So I would remove this connector, and what I would do, there's two terminals, two big terminals here. And if it was a pyro fuse, it operates pretty much the same way, except it's actually screwed and bolted into the pack. This red lead would not go to the overall output of the battery pack where the high voltage battery cables would go. In this case, I just went over here. I'd have to take this red lead and connect it to one of these terminals inside there, leave the black lead where it is, and then I would basically be charging or discharging most times half the battery pack. Some structures, the way they wire the battery cells in there, sometimes a little bit more than half. But as of right now, there's very few vehicles out there that have a higher than 600 volt battery in them. So as of right now with current technology, this tool is pretty versatile. There's only talks of a couple vehicles out there coming out with an 800 volt battery. So as of right now though, all those cars that have the 800 volt batteries, nobody's working on them anyways. They're all still under warranty going back to the dealership. So that's the simplicity of how to use this tool. It's not a difficult concept. It will balance even without these wires, but it's balancing at the pack level. So it's balancing module compared to module compared to module. It is more accurate to balance at the cell level, but again, to get to the cells is a lot of work. So that's why some mechanics are going to say, I'm not ever hooking up these little red wires. Instead, I'm just going to do it at the pack level, and I'm okay. If I don't get all those lost miles back, I'm okay. You're still doing the customer service, but no matter what, again, I'm going to stress this, and this is going to be the closing comment, no matter what, make sure those thermistor wires are in place, because if you don't have any way to monitor this, this machine has no way to shut itself off. So you would have to stand here. If you're not going to use those wires, you'd have to stand here and stare at that screen all day to make sure nothing's getting too hot, you're not overcharging the battery, you're not damaging the battery in any way, shape, or form. So overall, it's a pretty simple, easy tool to use. It does have one level of difficulty, but once you've used it a couple times, it becomes second nature, and it is a great service that you can perform for your customers.